and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherri Davidoff. I'm the founder of LMG Security.
And I'm Matt Duran, the Director of Training and Research for LMG Security.
And today we're going to talk about the new executive order that came out on January 6th, which rolled back a lot of important cybersecurity programs.
It kept some stuff too.
It did. So today we're going to talk about what was cut, what's left, and what that means for all of us going forward.
Yeah.
So with that, let's start off by talking about how security attestations were rolled back for software developers. So we've been talking all year about software exploits and zero-day software exploits and how they're letting criminals in and how hard it is to keep up. So one of the government's priorities over the past few years has been to kind of get ahead of the curve, start to put proactive cybersecurity requirements on at least federal government contractors. Until now.
Yeah.
So do you want to explain a little more, Matt, about the rollbacks in attestations specifically?
Yeah, so the attestation was basically, when a contractor would come in and sell their software to the federal government, they would formally submit paperwork that would go to CISA that would state that they followed secure software development practices and essentially that they weren't giving a piece of software to the government that was developed in a way that would make it vulnerable, or at least not, they were doing their best to not make it vulnerable.
And frankly, for years and years, there really weren't a whole lot of generally accepted secure software development standards that were widely followed.
Well, even the definition of secure software kind of floats back and forth.
There's vulnerabilities in everything, we know that. But this really, even though it only applied to government contractors, the same organizations, the same software developers that were selling their software to the government were also selling to the private sector and nonprofits and others. And so this really started raising the bar. In fact, this is an area which was strengthened a few years ago by a prior executive order. It was a requirement for software developers to have secure development practices, but they didn't have to test to it. And they really didn't, there was not a lot of evidence-based fact-checking until one of the recent executive orders in the Biden and Obama administrations.
Right, yeah.
So those requirements just got rolled back so that there's no attestation. And what got hit with the shrapnel were...
SBOMs.
SBOMs, that's right. I was wondering if you'd say it. You did. You kind of almost didn't.
I almost didn't, but yeah.
Yeah,
so SBOMs, for those of you who are not familiar with it, the SBOM is a software bill of materials, and it's basically like an ingredients list for what's in the software that you're using. And this becomes really important because in a lot of pieces of software, there is a high amount of open source, third party, or external libraries.
Log4j.
Log4j, yes. Other libraries that are used to create that piece of software. Because let's face it, if I'm
Log4j.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But no, if I'm building a brand new piece of software, I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time I need it to do something.
No.
If I need a simple logging utility and I'm writing a Java program,
and you want it to be free,
and I want it to be free, or at least licensed, reasonably, I can use something like Log4j.
Log4j.
Yeah, and this again, where Sherri is coughing up a hairball about
the
this
internet was on fire.
It was on
that
fire.
Was one of the headlines.
That was one of the headlines.
This little known, this obscure library, which was incorporated into hundreds, if not thousands, of different products, had a major vulnerability which allowed it to be remotely exploited.
Yeah.
Literally, I remember the headline, the internet is on fire, everybody run.
No, I remember. I think it was Vice magazine that printed that one.
Maybe it might have been Wired.
Might have been Wired, yeah.
But tell us about the mobile iron product, because I think that was a perfect example of what happens when some library with a major vulnerability gets sneaked into a vendor product.
Sure. Yeah, no, we were working with a client at that point in time, and they called us, and they remind you, this is 2 weeks after the Log4j vulnerability was released publicly.
So that means hackers were already exploiting.
Yeah, 14 days later, we get notice that a client of ours is using a piece of software called Mobile Iron. And Mobile Iron, as it turns out, which they didn't realize at the time, used that Log4j library. That they were vulnerable to the actual exploit itself.
And this is an internet-facing security device. So it's out there on the poor little street corner of the internet getting exploited, likely hacked.
Well, it's security software. It's built for mobile device management. So it kind of has to connect out to the internet, otherwise it can't work.
And it's vulnerable.
But they had us come take a look at it, and by the time we got in there to take a look at it, they had been hacked by 2 individual groups at that point in time. We found the Mirai botnet, and then we found a crypto miner that had been loaded onto that system. And this, again, because they did not know that this was part of their software, they were not able to react in time.
Right. And it was really hard for Mobile Iron or any vendor to announce, because once you announce that your product is vulnerable, hackers start to go after it.
Yeah.
So it's not even necessarily in customers' best interest for vendors to publicly announce it. What you want is for customers to know, but maybe not to advertise that to all the bad guys out there.
Fair enough.
So our federal government actually encouraged and spearheaded an effort for software developers to adopt SBOMs,
Yes.
software bills of materials. What is that, you ask? Well, it's similar to having ingredients labeling on food packaging, right?
Well, that's exactly what it is.
So you go to buy a package of Oreos and you know how much flour is in there and how much sugar and does it have wheat and what are the allergens.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is when you buy a piece of software, Mobile Iron, you know that Log4j is part of that. And if there's a problem with Log4j, you can just check the ingredients and say, oh, here are the 5 products that I need to either protect extra or pull off the internet. And they don't even the vendor doesn't have to do anything.
Right.
We all have that information ahead of time. We can all assess risk. We can all understand and act quickly.
Well, I remember we did a webinar that included Log4j like right after the vulnerability came out. And we talked about how actually easy it was to generate those SBOMs. Like, it's not a really difficult thing to do. In fact, there's a lot of free utilities out there that you can use to get an idea for what's actually in your software. In fact, fun fact, if you guys go to watch that webinar, you can do it with malware too. We downloaded a piece of malware off of the dark web, and then we made an SBOM out of it, and so we could see all the packages they were using to create that piece of malicious software.
Yeah. You can check all kinds of software and see what's in it, malware or not.
But the big push right now is to, and it goes with the attestation thing, I mean, it's to move it away from something that's a mandate from the government and make it more of a private industry responsibility.
So starting around that era in the Biden administration, I can't remember if it was before or after Log4j, honestly. It might have been before. Contractors were required to submit things like SBOMs to CISA.
Yeah.
And that's been in process over the past several years. But now that's not a requirement. Can they do it voluntarily? Yes.
Sure.
You know, it might be a selling point that your food has an ingredients list on it.
Well, I mean, the big centralized CISA repository of, machine searchable SBOMs is gone now. So, I mean, that's tough.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. When you told me about this, I was just so sad that SBOMs were dead because I think that's something that could really help us.
No, I agree.
It isn't all bad, though. We're going to get to some of the good stuff or some of the okay stuff here in a little bit.
Some of the
But
less bad
SBOMs,
stuff.
let's shed a little tear for SBOMs right now. Again, we can still choose to adopt them voluntarily in the private sector. It's just not something that's going to be required by our federal government.
And by the way, you should absolutely adopt those.
Yes,
Like they're super useful.
take away, boom, boom, require SBOMs if you can. Okay. We also saw, and I actually have the text of the executive order right here. We have more paper on our table than I think we've had in months.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yes. Among the text of the executive order is rolling back the authentication requirements within the federal government itself. So we saw agencies were, up to this point, required to adopt multi-factor authentication practices to the greatest extent possible, and also to encrypt data at rest. That has been rolled back. And again, that the agencies were a model for things like phishing-resistant MFA.
Yeah.
That was really helping to drive the creation, development, and adoption of new technologies. And so again, it's not like it's being banned, it's just now turned over to the private sector to pick that ball up.
Well, yeah, it's another one of those examples of the administration, and they're doing this with a lot of different things other than cybersecurity, but they're trying to pull things away from being required by the government and just being suggested instead.
Yes.
Yeah.
This reminds me a lot of what happened with PCI,
yeah.
with the payment card industry standards. So back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of credit card fraud, if you recall. And there were rumblings amongst lawmakers that, hey, we need to do something about it. We need to pass the law.
Yeah.
And to paraphrase the credit card companies, they said, no. We will take care of this ourselves. We can self-regulate. And they did.
Yes.
And that's why the payment card industry data security standard is not a law. It's not a regulation. It's something created by the card brands that in a lot of ways pushes the liability down to small businesses, down to the banks, so that when fraud happens, it's the banks, it's businesses, it's retailers, merchants that are really bearing the cost of fraud. And it also meant, the big problem with credit cards, of course, is that you have a long number that you have to keep really secret. But what do you need to do in order to use it?
You hand it to people
you
constantly.
You hand it to people. I
and
mean,
you go to restaurants and you let the waiter walk away with it.
Yeah. It doesn't take a genius or even a 12-year-old to figure out that that is a fundamental security problem.
Yeah.
And it's something that we have had the technology to solve for a long time. That's what chip and pin is about, actual authentication. You don't need to print the number on the face of the card.
Right.
But in order to adopt that, it required huge updates throughout the whole ecosystem, and it was not something that everyone wanted to invest in.
Right.
So instead, we put a lot of Band-Aids on the system, and we've endured 20 years or more excessive fraud. We have managed to roll that back with a lot of effort, things like fraud monitoring, stuff like that, but the system is still fundamentally broken.
One of my favorite things about that, and I think you were the one who brought this up in one of our data breaches classes, is that Target was one of the big kind of like poster children used for adopting like chip and pin here in the United States.
That's right, after their big hack.
After the hack, and then it came, and then we kind of realized that like it probably wouldn't have stopped the hack in the first place. But yeah.
Oh yeah, no, chip and pin would not have stopped that hack. Actually, well, okay, we'll go down that tangent another day. Back to the executive order. So yeah, we're now basically seeing the government saying, hey, you know what, software developers, regulate yourselves.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll see that. Hopefully we, in the private sector and others and industry associations can push software development companies to use safer and more secure practices. But
I mean, I think for the most part they probably will. But
I'm feeling a little depressed.
Yeah.
I feel like, think about apartment. I'd love to get your opinion on this. I think about like apartments and fire safety.
Mm-hmm.
And if people that rent out apartments weren't required to put sprinklers and smoke detectors in, would they do it consistently? I don't know. It's an expense.
Yeah, true.
And would tenants pay for it if they were required to pay for it? Probably not all of them. And we see that with like cloud software, for example.
Oh, yeah, like Microsoft's logging.
Yeah. I mean, like people are not paying for some of the security features that they really need.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we've seen a trend towards not charging for multi-factor authentication. But you remember when that was very common?
Yeah, I remember when it was really common. Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
What's
moving
next,
forward.
Matt? What's next?
Digital identity.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so there were some provisions that were put in place near the end of the Biden administration that were really moving towards creating a universal login or authentication system for federal government services and mobile identification, so like mobile driver's license. And if you look at the actual note sheet as to why this was stricken from being a requirement from the government, why we rolled back wanting to do that, there was some language about a fear of illegal immigrants using it to fraudulently obtain government services if digital IDs were a thing. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's what would have happened.
I mean, it's too bad because digital IDs, I mean, they're going to be the way of the future.
Oh, they're already here in a lot of other countries.
And I mean,
we're lagging behind.
How hard is it to get a fake physical ID? Should we walk into a bar and find some teenagers and ask?
It wouldn't take much time.
I don't know. A lot of ways, digital IDs are more secure. Like issue people a private key when they're born. Tattoo it on them.
You
heard it here first.
I don't think we need to do that. But yeah.
Okay. I want some good news. I'm feeling depressed.
You don't want to talk about election security really quick?
No, definitely not.
All right.
No, that's another day.
All right.
What was preserved? The FTC Cyber Trust.
The Cyber Trust
Cyber Trust mark. Okay, we talked about this in one of our first episodes.
Yeah, this is one of our really old podcasts, and for those that don't remember or don't know about this, the Cyber Trust mark, think about it like the Energy Star logo that you see in appliances. It's a little decal that can go on Internet of Things devices that will let you know that the manufacturer is adhering to safe development practices and lets you do things like change the default password and update the firmware. And there's no way anyone could ever counterfeit that.
There's no way counterfeit products from China could ever have a fake logo on them.
No, of course not.
And the best part was, and you should check out our podcast on this, it comes with a QR code.
Right.
Which never would go to a malicious website. And I can't imagine anybody putting a sticker over the real QR code to direct people to a different place.
Yeah, I mean, we laughed about this when it first came out. And, if it can be implemented properly and it actually works, that's great. But, I see a lot of downsides to this. It's like the Redondo Beach parking meter things that we talk about. When attackers were sticking fake QR codes on the parking meters, then it took people off to phishing websites, stole their credit card numbers, and then they probably still got a parking ticket.
Scan me for security purposes.
I don't trust QR codes at this point. All right,
we need to just stop asking people to scan QR codes.
Let's move on to something that's actually good, though.
Okay,
so let's talk about post-quantum cryptography support.
Yes, that is good.
That is
and
a good
actually, I have that with little stars in it on my printouts.
Perfect.
Yeah, they have a couple of sections. We're going to start to see stuff coming out from Homeland Security by December 1st, 2025. They shall release and thereafter regularly update a list of product categories in which products that support post-quantum cryptography, PQC, are widely available. So we're going to start to see some communication from the federal government.
Yep.
We're going to move in to the post-quantum era, which is great.
It is.
And I'm really glad they're prioritizing this.
Well, I mean, they have until 2035 to implement it at the federal government level.
No, they don't, because Q days.
I was going to say, is that really
and
prioritizing
we have another
it?
podcast on that from a few weeks ago.
We do, yeah. Just to clarify, if you haven't heard that podcast, post-quantum cryptography is the idea that the public-private key infrastructure that runs like everything that we consider to be secure, basically,
is going to break.
It's going to break, yeah.
Yeah, so you should, if you want to know more, listen to that podcast.
Yep.
Okay, the other thing that's good is there's a whole big section here about AI and incorporating management of AI software vulnerabilities into certain agencies' existing processes and
right.
interagency coordination mechanisms. So, and there's a bit more there about managing AI and sharing information with cyber researchers as well.
There was also some stuff about cutting out the requirements around AI code development safety, so yeah, it's not all great.
It's a little bit of a mixed bag. Yeah, there was a little bit of cutting on quantum too, but not that much.
Not that much.
Yeah. Could be worse. The other thing is we are still expecting to see an updated version of NIST 800-53, which is what?
The security and privacy controls for information systems and organizations. That is the only time I'm going to say that during this podcast.
So yeah, it's good that we will see, well, maybe it's good, we don't know. We do expect to be seeing updates to NIST 800-53 in September, I believe, so stay tuned for that. Other than that, maybe just some final thoughts on what we're seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, as we mentioned before, the big things that we see in these rollbacks and the changes that we see to just general policy towards cybersecurity in general is that things are being pushed away from being required or mandated by the government at this point. A lot's being pushed back onto private industry and you, the consumer, at that point too. I mean, you need to be way more on the ball about evaluating your third-party risk management or the pieces of software that you're bringing in, because there's not going to be there's not going to be the government nanny telling you what you can and can't do. Or what,
I'm not sure I'd put it like that, but there's not going to be as much central coordination.
Sure.
Yeah, because I mean, the government wasn't mandating this for the private sector to begin with, just to make sure that's clear. So what are our key takeaways here?
Well, the first thing, and we kind of hinted at this already, but if you are buying new software, if you're getting into a business with a new developer or something like that, don't drop your SBOMs. Make sure that no.
Don't drop those SBOMs.
Right? I mean, for attestations about secure software development, for software bills of material, things like that, I mean, I would still highly recommend requiring that as part of your procurement process. Regardless of the fact that it's not required by the government at this point, it's still really good to have in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, reevaluate your third-party software risk practices now. There's no central validation anymore and less communication and coordination from our federal government. So it's really up to you to verify what your vendors are claiming, which is especially hard, I think, for our SMBs, our small to mid-sized organizations, our nonprofit, our public entities. Think about banding together or relying on professional groups and associations that you work with.
Yep.
Hopefully we'll be seeing larger organizations really like pushing the envelope on this, but definitely, don't be shy about asking for security, evidence of security.
Yeah. Next, and this is something you should probably be doing anyway, but watch out for gaps in things like multi-factor authentication, encryption, the identity and access management systems that you're using. I mean, these are very, very important pieces of any network, not just government networks. And making sure you're using phishing-resistant multi-factor, that you have encryption at rest, in transit, and in use, if possible. That you're using a solid identity and access management system that actually controls access to your environment. Again, there are things you should be doing anyway, but it's going to be a lot more on the individual businesses and the individual vendors to offer those solutions and make sure they're being implemented correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the bottom line. These rollbacks are really shifting responsibility to the buyers, to CISOs, to procurement teams, and even insurance carriers to help kind of set standards and push organizations to really vet their vendors, including software developers.
Huge.
So our last takeaway is to prepare for industry-led enforcement. So information sharing groups, buyers, and also possibly cyber insurers as well.
Oh, I'd imagine they're going to have a hand in this.
Yeah. So get ahead by communicating, finding your people, and starting to talk about what standards we want to be seeing.
There we go.
So with that was a really big topic today.
That was.
Thanks for digesting that with me, and thanks to you all for tuning in.
Man, 20-minute podcast, too.
I know. I'm Sherri Davidoff.
I'm Matt Duran.
Thanks for tuning in, and please like and subscribe to Cyberside Chats. We hope to see you next week.